In a kingdom where the crown was not simply worn but carried like a weight that could shape or break a life, 4 sisters arrived at the palace beneath a sky that felt unusually still, their dresses marked by travel, their steps steady, their presence impossible to ignore, and as the great gates opened and warm sunlight poured across the marble courtyard, it became clear that though they walked side by side, they were not reflections of one another, but 4 distinct forces moving towards something none of them had yet chosen, and perhaps something that had already begun choosing them. Amara walked forward with quiet grace, her long curls resting softly over her shoulders, her gaze calm and grounded as if she did not need to prove her place in any room she entered, while Nia stood beside her with sharp precision, her braided ponytail firm, her posture unyielding and her eyes already reading the space like a challenge waiting to be met, and Zara followed with warmth that softened even the guards who stood rigid at attention, her smile effortless, her presence open and inviting, while Amani lingered just behind them, her locks falling over her shoulder, her silence deeper than stillness, her awareness moving beyond what could be seen as if she had stepped into this moment already understanding something the others had yet to realize. What none of them knew was that the king had not chosen them yet, because long before they arrived he had already seen them separately in moments that had stayed with him long after they passed, moments that now returned with quiet clarity as he watched them from above, hidden in shadow, not as a ruler observing guests but as a man recognizing something familiar. He had seen Amara standing between 2 men ready to fight in a crowded marketplace, her voice steady, her presence calming something that words alone could not reach, and that stillness had unsettled him because power had never looked so quiet. And he had crossed paths with Nia in disguise during a heated debate where she challenged him without hesitation, her words sharp, fearless and unfiltered, and instead of anger he had felt something far more dangerous, respect, and he had watched Zara kneel beside an injured stranger on a quiet road, offering help without question and without expectation, and even when she learned who he was nothing in her changed, and that honesty had stayed with him in a way he could not explain. And Amani he had only seen once standing still while everything moved around her, and something about that stillness had unsettled him more than anything else. Now they stood before him not as memories but as possibilities, and what began as curiosity quickly turned into something far more complicated, because he did not just observe them, he began to feel them. In the early days the palace shifted from ceremony to rhythm, and it was in the gardens beneath the soft glow of late afternoon light that Amara and the king, Adrian, met not as ruler and guest but simply as 2 people, their conversation unfolding without effort, their silence carrying meaning, and when their hands brushed for the first time neither pulled away immediately and the moment lingered just long enough to be felt, and in the days that followed they found themselves walking together more often, their words becoming more personal, their pauses more intentional, until one evening as rain tapped gently against the palace windows Adrian reached for her hand without hesitation and this time she did not question it. Nia moved differently through the palace, stepping into spaces others avoided and standing in the council chamber in structured gowns that reflected her strength, her voice cutting through tradition as she challenged advisors who had never been questioned so directly, and though Adrian found himself drawn to her fire it was in the training grounds that something else began to form because Commander Kai met her not with admiration but with resistance, matching her strength and refusing to step aside. And what began as conflict slowly shifted into something neither of them fully understood, moments where words slowed, where distance shortened and where tension no longer pushed them apart but held them in place. At first their interactions were sharp and relentless, every conversation sounding more like a challenge than connection, but over time Nia began noticing the things she had overlooked before, the way Kai never interrupted her when she spoke, the way he watched her not with intimidation but with respect, and the way he stood near her without trying to overpower her presence, and one afternoon as the training grounds emptied beneath the heat of the setting sun, Kai stepped close enough for the tension between them to feel impossible to ignore, and though every instinct in Nia told her to pull away, she didn't move, because for the first time in her life someone stood in front of her without trying to control her, and that realization unsettled her far more than conflict ever could. Zara moved where she was needed, her days filled with quiet acts of care, her presence bringing comfort without effort, and though her moments with Adrian were light and genuine her heart began to shift elsewhere toward Malik, the guard who had watched her long before she noticed him, a man who spoke only when necessary and who saw her kindness not as softness but as strength, and when he finally stepped forward, his words simple and his presence steady, she did not pull away, and in that pause something real began. Their connection grew slowly in the spaces between obligation and choice, through shared walks across quiet courtyards and conversations that never needed grand declarations to matter. And one evening, as the sun dipped low beyond the village hills, Malik admitted softly that he had noticed her from the very beginning, not because she tried to stand out but because she treated people as though they mattered even when no one was watching. And Zara smiled in a way that revealed both surprise and relief, because for the first time she felt seen, not for what she could become, but for who she already was. Amani remained between spaces, never fully seen and never fully absent, her movements quiet and deliberate, and it was in the dim corridor where shadows stretched along the walls that she found the Queen Mother's advisor, Elion, standing in silence, and instead of passing him as she had done so many times before, she stopped, and for a moment neither spoke until he said softly that some people came to the palace to be chosen while others came because they were always meant to be there, and for the first time she did not walk away, and in that stillness something deeper than words took root. Unlike the others, their connection did not grow through closeness or confession, but through understanding, through long silences that somehow never felt empty, through moments where one glance said more than an entire conversation. And as days passed, Elion became the one person who never demanded anything from Amani, never pushed past her silence, never tried to turn her into something easier to understand, and because of that she found herself returning to him again and again, not out of obligation, but because his presence felt strangely familiar, as though he understood parts of her she had never spoken aloud. As the days turned into weeks, what once felt like observation deepened into attachment, and what once seemed simple began to carry weight, because Adrian was no longer choosing between qualities but standing between different kinds of connection: peace, fire, warmth, and something he could not yet name. And when the announcement came that one would be chosen, the palace did not fill with excitement but with tension, because now every path meant losing something real. That night everything shifted, Nia confronting Amara with a sharpness that carried more than anger, asking if she had already chosen the crown over everything else. And for the first time Amara could not answer immediately because she had begun to feel the cost of what stood before her. And Zara walked alone, her tears quiet and real, because she had realized that her heart had already begun to choose something she could not ignore. And Amani disappeared, leaving behind not confusion but a silence that felt intentional. By morning the palace stood in tension, and as the throne room gathered, Adrian stood with a decision that no longer felt simple because every choice now carried consequence. And just as the moment approached, the great doors opened and Amani returned, walking forward with calm certainty, no longer distant and no longer observing, and behind her stood the Queen Mother while Elion remained several steps behind, silent but watchful. The truth that followed did not unfold gently but struck, because this had never been a simple selection and never a matter of choosing the most admired, but a test not just of the sisters but of Adrian himself. And as the Queen Mother spoke, she revealed that Amani had never been part of the competition but part of the truth, observing, understanding and revealing what could not be seen in performance. And then came the question that changed everything, asking who he could lose and still remain whole. The silence that followed was heavy and unyielding, and when Adrian finally answered, he did not choose from desire alone but from truth, choosing Amara not because it was easy but because it was not, because in her he found a peace strong enough to hold everything else he would have to let go. The moment did not break the others but revealed them, because Nia did not fall but lifted her head, her strength never meant to stand behind a crown but beside power, and Zara's tears did not last because the love that had found her did not require her to compete, and Amani stood exactly where she had always belonged, untouched by the need to be chosen. Months passed and the palace transformed once more, this time not for a decision but for a union, as Amara stood in royal gold, her presence calm and her certainty unshaken, and as she and Adrian exchanged vows there was no doubt left, only truth and understanding of what had been chosen and what had been released. And yet even then the story did not end, because love does not arrive all at once but reveals itself in time. The very next day, in the training grounds where strength had once been tested through conflict, Nia stood alone until Kai approached, not to challenge her and not to stand against her but to stand beside her. And when he told her he had stopped fighting her because he had started choosing her, she did not respond with resistance but stepped closer, closing the space herself and for the first time allowed herself to stand without needing to prove anything, and when Kai gently rested his forehead against hers she closed her eyes, not in surrender but in peace. Days later, far from the palace where life moved slower and the air felt lighter, Zara walked through the village she had grown to love, her laughter returning and her spirit free, and when Malik stepped toward her no longer bound by duty, his presence open and his intentions clear, she did not hesitate, and when he reached for her hand she placed hers in his fully, not as a question but as an answer she had already chosen, and as they continued walking side by side through the golden afternoon light she realized that love had found her not in the palace but in the quiet simplicity of being understood. And in the quiet chamber beside the Queen Mother where power moved in silence rather than display, Amani stood as she always had, composed and aware, and when Elion spoke, not asking her to stay but acknowledging that she met his gaze fully, and when she said that she did not remain in places that did not make sense to her and that for the first time this did, it was not a declaration but a truth, and he stepped closer, not closing the distance completely but enough to make it shared, and she did not move away, because unlike the others their love had never needed grand gestures, only recognition. In the end, as the four sisters stood together once more overlooking the kingdom, the wind moving through curls, braids, afro and locks, it became clear that they had never been competing for one life but had each been walking toward their own, and the crown had not taken anything away but had revealed everything. Not all love arrives at the same moment, but the right love finds you when you finally understand where you belong. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful stories filled with love, drama, twists, and unforgettable endings, and tell me in the comments, if you were Adrian, who would you have chosen?